Hi, I have something to show you today. You know what it is? Can you read that? It says the Holy Bible. This is quite a big Bible, as you can see. It's one that you probably wouldn't carry to church or Bible studies, that you wouldn't get out every night. Although it's a Bible, a family Bible that we have that I got 40 years ago. My husband and I got married. We kind of put it on the coffee table and use it as a decoration. But it's a pretty special Bible because it has a lot of information about our family in there and some great pictures. Look at that picture of Daniel in the lion's den. Well, when I was thinking about Bibles like that, it reminded me back in the Middle Ages when they had to copy the Bibles by hand. And usually they were monks that would do this, and it would take like 20 monks all of their lives to copy one Bible. And it would take a lot of parchment to write on back then too. In fact, one Bible would take either 175 cattle or 300 sheep, because they would use the parchment would come from the animal skins. So a Bible became quite expensive. In fact, in the churches, they would chain the Bible up there to the pulpit so that nobody would steal it. And if you were just a regular person, you just couldn't go up there in front and start reading the Bible. And most people back there couldn't read that during that time couldn't read anyway. And to put on top of that, the Bibles back then were written in the Latin Vulgate, which was not the common language of the people. Most people didn't even know Latin. But still, the Bibles, they were a source of beauty because they knew the Bibles were the Word of God. So when I think about that back then, I think about today, and now I have like 20 Bibles or more, and I'm giving them out all the time, because they're printed. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about. This lesson 88. We're going to be talking about printing in the Renaissance. Actually, printing began the Renaissance. So let's look back. Think back what we've already read, and back into the Middle Ages, the times of the knights in the shining armor and the on horseback riding in the stone castles, the long journeys on the Silk Road, cannons and swords, and then we think of the Dark Ages even darker. We think of the bubonic plague. It's a kind of really dark time. There were no books to read, and scientists didn't do very many inventions during that time. History was virtually forgotten, and medicine, doctors, they knew hardly anything about the human body at all. So they needed to be able to pass on information. So when we think of all the inventions of time, what's your favorite invention? Maybe the airplane so we can get around. Maybe the computer age that we have, which truly was a magnificent invention. Einstein and the theory of relativity, maybe the atomic bomb, which is a terrible invention. But we can think of things like movies and television, all these things. When we look back at that time, probably the greatest invention by far was the printing press. You wouldn't think that would be it, but it would, because the printing press enabled people to write information down and to pass it along easier. You see, the books back then were written by hand, and they not only the Bibles, but other books too, were rarely passed on unless they were passed on by their families. Well, when we think of the printing press, we're going to go back to the 1400s, kind of prior to the invention of the printing press. The movable printing type was already invented in China. In fact, in the first year BC, the Chinese invented another kind of paper. the paper was made by taking bark or straw or even old rags and soaking them in water. Bamboo was a good one that they would use. Also, they would take the hemp plant, which was very common back there, and take it and make it into a pulp and soak it for long periods of time. And then they would beat it out flat, and then they'd take this flat pulp-like stuff and put it on a wire, and it'd come up to look like something they could write on. And they called this Chinese paper. So they had invented that, but as we know, in China, not very much of the information got to Europe from China. In fact, it's mainly the Muslim Arabs that brought the information from China. As you know, the Silk Road was not a favorite place for traders to be most of the time, and we talked about that in the times of Marco Polo. But the Arabs brought in, and the parchment paper was not what they were using. They were using some of this new Chinese paper. And then, not only that, the Chinese had, like I said, developed the movable type. And so they would end up taking little wooden letters, and they'd carve out these little wooden letters, and then they'd put them together in like a little puzzle type thing and hook them together, and then they'd put ink on them, and then they'd flatten it out onto this new paper they invented, and they would be able to read it and read notes and letters. Well, wood wasn't that good of a thing to bring back because it didn't last very long, and it really didn't go in Europe yet. They didn't really understand this type of movable type that the Chinese used. And like I said, not too many Arabs brought them back, but when they did, the information did get around somewhat about that. So we can't say definitely that the Europeans invented printing, but definitely they invented the printing press. And that's what we're going to talk about next.